let's get into what you just said about I'd rather have the Chinese government than a journalist with my information and who the real enemies are, because we got some updates. We got the story from Fox News. Glenn Greenwald. The NSA had legal obligation to conceal Tucker Carlson's identity from intercepted communications. I love this story because it follows those steps like you laid out.
Right.
First, they were like, Tucker's full of it. Nobody's spying on him. Then they said, well, okay, maybe, but not really. We're at the point now where it's, well, so, okay, fine, but it's not a big deal. I mean, he was trying to talk to Putin. So, of course, they weren't spying on him. They're just spying on American journalists in general.
Right.
They unmasked Tucker Carlson.
Yep. No, it's remarkable. And I think there's still probably important details that we don't yet know. We might never know. But just the story as it's out now is remarkable. And I think it does represent a substantial escalation in our march toward this dystopian hell state. Because, yes, we know they're surveilling our stuff. Yes, we know you should expect that they're looking at, especially if you're communicating with, Russian officials and so forth. But the unmasking and the leaking and the political weaponization of that is a remarkable step, and it could gesture toward what becomes the new norm, which is, just the logical extension of the fact that our national security state has become a political weapon.
Right.
And that's the whole domestic war on terror.
It's like the Soviet Union.
Right, exactly. And it is strange though that this is the thing, because you've had journalists like Megyn Kelly interview Putin and otherwise. So it's like,
well, she was probably spied on as well.
Well, sure she was. But this idea that this is how they're going to embarrass Tucker, like I'm jealous of Tucker if the most embarrassing thing about him is that he was seeking an interview with Putin, and assuming like the NSA is looking at everything we're doing, well,
there are limits, I suppose.
Right.
So if information leaked that Tucker Carlson was going to meet with Vladimir Putin,
right,
people would start to make assumptions about who may have been involved.
Right.
Perhaps the leak would have been substantially worse. So I'll put it this way. Let's say that the NSA is spying on Tucker to an extreme degree. Mm-hmm. Like, they know that he just went out and bought some flowers and chocolates for his wife, and they know what the note he submitted to the store. He sent a note saying, "Please include this in the card when you send the flowers to my wife. I'm so sorry. We fought last night. Please, let's never fight again." And then they're like, "Ooh, we got trouble at home. We can make him look like a bad husband. This leak is going to be a great smear." But when Tucker then says the NSA is spying on me,
right,
it puts them in a limited position. Because now if they come out and say, here's Tucker Carlson's web history, everyone's going to be like, whoa, the NSA is doing all that?
Right.
Now it's kind of like, hey, the NSA incidentally picked up one of his emails.
Right. No.
But if they actually were spying on him, this preemptive move from Tucker was brilliant. It stopped them from releasing the worst of the worst if they actually had it.
Yeah, I mean, depending what the worst was. And, they're in a position to do that. Ultimately, Google's in a position to do that, just almost as much as the NSA itself. And the question is, that's an existential risk to the company. If, as bad as Google has been, if they release the contents of people's Gmails or Gchats or something for political purposes, that I think is a severe risk to the company, just in economic sense, even in this environment. And so if they were to do that, they better make sure that it's a worthy target and the right time and so forth. And so, I think the Tucker story is yet to maybe play out in full. But absolutely, I think it was the right move for him to go preemptive, because the story at the present moment, I think, looks much worse for the NSA. So if they were looking to embarrass him with an interview with Putin, which isn't even embarrassing, why wouldn't a major journalist of his stature be trying to do an interview with Putin?
Because maybe the story was something else.
There you go.
Maybe the story was Tucker Carlson, sent a lewd message to an intern or something. And they had communications, and Tucker's like, that was a text message I sent. But then when he says this, the NSA is now named. If the story was hackers, how did we get the information? Must have been hackers. Must have been, a breach. If Tucker didn't say anything, it could have been anyone. But he called it the NSA specifically, so it sounds like it was the NSA. And they were forced to hold back. I don't know if that's true or not, but this story's not even embarrassing.
Right.
Why would someone go to Tucker and say, hey, look, they're going to do this thing? Unless either Tucker is clean as a whistle and they're full of it and they're desperate, or they got put on the spot and had to back down.
Right. I think there are a number of possibilities. So it's an interesting story. We're working on incomplete information, but insofar as the story is the NSA is spying on journalists and they're willing to leak things for political purposes, that's absolutely, I don't think that's a controversial statement.
How deep is it? Do they subpoena Google to send them every voice? Because this is recording right now, waiting to hear its own name. The Google and the Amazon machine is listening. Do they just have complete access to all of this data at all times?
Basically, I mean, anything that isn't encrypted.
Which is basically everything.
Yeah. And,
yes,
and the stuff that's encrypted, they have stored in some warehouse in the Southwest. And they're just waiting until they have the computing power to get it.
Right.
Even if it's 10 years from now, they've got a bunch of interesting stuff. They're just waiting for the computer power to get it. But,
this is my warning to the average person. These Amazon devices, we've got one in the room. How does it know when its name is said? So the way these devices work is that an audio file of what you say is sent to a company that then transcodes the audio file into text, which the computer can then read and then ask questions and things like that. That means these devices have to be on and listening all the time. It doesn't mean necessarily they're sending everything you say off to these companies, but it might be the case. They have in the past. In the past, that's how it used to say in the terms of service for a lot of these services, that everything you say is sent to a company to be transcribed. And that means that your phones were always listening.
Right.
But I think it would be absurd if it was constantly transmitting every word you said, full audio files. I mean, that would be a hefty data transmission you'd probably notice.
Right.
So early on, what a lot of the phones did was they would make you say the word 3 times to get a pattern from your voice so that when you could say something. As for these home networks, you know what? We got an IT guy. We should probably track that and see if we're getting, we'll shut off all the data except for these devices and see what they do when they're, isolated.
Dude, they're harvesting everything.
Perhaps.
Everything. Data is so cheap these days. Quantum computing has shifted the game.
And it could be compressing, so it's hard to track. But the other thing about Tucker Carlson, too, is, when he mentioned the 6th, and you mentioned this as well, the federal involvement.
Yep.
The potential federal involvement. I guess, is there any evidence to back up that claim other than informants or potential informants?
Well, I mean, there's a tremendous evidence, and it depends how much time we want to spend on this, because my news organization, Revolver.News, we have 2 major pieces on this topic. The first piece was the subject that was basically the inspiration for the monologue, the Tucker's monologue, which became the biggest story in the country. And I went on and I said my piece there as well. So it depends in how much detail you want to go. Just to give the highlights for people listening who may not have heard this and are interested, I think one thing that generally perks people's attention is just something that nobody thought to remark upon. And that is that we don't have to go all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover to detail the malfeasance of the FBI and other organizations. For 1/6, you just need to go back a couple months to this so-called Michigan kidnapping plot, the Michigan plot. And in a nutshell, what this was a plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, who was very draconian on COVID policies. But that plot also involved, many people don't know this, it also involved a plot to storm the Michigan state capitol. The so-called mastermind of this plot was a member of a militia group called 3 Percenters, which is one of the 3 major militia groups imputed to 1/6. So you have the same plot, one of the same militia groups, and you have, of the 18 plotters, we now know that at least 5 were either undercover agents or informants. 5 out of 18 is a hell of a ratio. And just as a cherry on top, the head of the Detroit FBI field office, who was in charge of this infiltration operation in Michigan, just days after the so-called plotters were arrested, FBI Director Wray promoted him to the D.C. field office where he went on to oversee the 1/6 investigation. Now, I'm not suggesting that logically means 1/6 means anything. I have my own argument about 1/6 that I can get into. But for people who have initial resistance just in terms of their sense that we don't do that, that's not the kind of thing we do, you don't need to go back to J. Edgar Hoover. You just need to go back a couple months prior to the so-called storm on the Capitol, and you see one of the same militia groups, the same plot, one of the same FBI agents associated with both events, and a federal infiltration ratio of 5 out of 18. And you're telling me that you had this and you didn't, and the explanation for the uniquely poor security on 1/6 is simply that this was an intelligence failure?
Did you see that video of the men wearing all blackout gear breaking into the Capitol? What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of video that's suspicious, and even more suspicious, there's a lot of video that hasn't yet been released. But the facts are trickling in. We now know that the D.C. police had an undercover agent in the morning of 1/6. And so, first of all, the D.C. police was sufficiently concerned to put an informant on the ground in 1/6, and yet they had uniquely poor security at the Capitol. That seems incongruent. And furthermore, it seems to beggar belief that the D.C. police would have an informant on the ground, actually an undercover agent on the ground, not an informant, and the FBI wouldn't have anyone. So, but that isn't even the argument that we get to in the piece. It depends how interested you are, how interested you think your audience is in a real breakdown.
We want to know.
Okay. So basically, the structure of the first piece is as follows. It gives the Michigan kidnapping plot to reinforce people's intuition. But then what it does is it looks at the charging documents related to the people actually indicted for major 1/6 related crimes, specifically people who belong to the major militia groups, which was the priority of the prosecution. And it notes there's something really weird here. You have one of the original prosecutors named Michael Sherwin. He said unabashedly, "We're going at this with a shock and awe standard of prosecution. That is the most severe standard imaginable." To give you a concrete sense of what that means, there's a guy called George Tanios who was at the Capitol. He was in the melee. He had bear spray on him. His friend came up to him and wanted to get the bear spray. He said, "Is it time? Should we spray some cops?" He said, no, not yet." For saying no, not yet, he's facing 60 years in prison. Wow. That's what shock and awe means. And just incidentally, the whole reason the bear spray was a big deal is that after basically Revolver.News exposed that Officer Sicknick was not bludgeoned to death by a fire extinguisher, they shifted the narrative to, he was killed by bear spray. We did a very...
Then they shifted it again.
Yeah, we did a very detailed comparative image analysis at Revolver.News and said, not only was he not killed by bear spray, he wasn't even sprayed by bear spray. And so that was the whole reason the bear spray was relevant to begin with. So his friend comes up to him and says, I want to get the bear spray. He says, no, not yet. He's facing 60 years.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.